Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to, what day is it even? You know, it's Monday, May 9th. And welcome to this live episode of Communications and Cigars from Studio H. That's correct. We are up here in Studio H here. That means I'm not at home. That means I'm out doing something else. But hey, that's quite all right, and that's fine here. And thank you for tuning in. So just want to give a little bit of programming note. If you are living in the Midwest, especially in Northwest and West Central Wisconsin, you know that today has been quite a day of rain and thunderstorms and stuff like that. And we're hoping and we're praying that we can get through the episode without a loss of power. So if the stream ends abruptly, that's probably why. So, not that I got mad at you and I stopped it. So, good evening, everybody. And tonight's episode, Season 1, Episode 32, GMRS versus Amateur Radio and Fight. No, just kidding. Yeah, I got to be corny like that every once in a while. But no, tonight's episode is going to be actually delving into kind of some of the questions that a lot of people have been coming up with lately, which is, what do I do, John? What do I do now? Do I do GMRS or do I do amateur? You know, before they used to be in two great separate planes on there as choice of communication, purpose of communication, and everything. And now it's kind of gone. It's kind of changed and just metamorphosized into this new different thing of which should I use? And we're going to discuss it. So we're going to do pros and cons of GMRS, and we're going to do pros and cons of amateur radio. And guess what? There are pros and cons of GMRS, and there are pros and cons of amateur radio. And guess what? Just like the digital modes and just like the different radio services and everything, that there's not going to be one clear winner. I will give you that kind of thing there. All right, so with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about, we got communications. Let's talk about the cigars. So cool thing about cigars I wanted to talk about tonight is, I hear a lot of people say, "Hey, my cigar burns unevenly. Why? Why is there? Why is that? No one really sure knows why is that? And the reason being is that cigars are going to burn unevenly for two things. And the first thing is going to be how you light it, and the second thing is going to be how you actually enjoy your cigar. So for people who have said, hey, what's the best way to light a cigar? Or what's the proper way to do it? The proper way really kind of to do it to make sure you're going to get a nice even burn is to do what they call toast the tip. And that's basically where you take the end of the cigar, and if you have a lighter or something like that, you basically are going to go ahead and light the end of the cigar and kind of toast that whole thing on there. You're not going to be dragging off the cigar at that point in time, but you're basically going to be holding it and then hold like a little lighter or a torch. I actually use like a little bit of a Zippo lighter kind of thing, or I do have a little torch. You can light a cigar with a match, but it's a little more difficult because then you got to spin while you're taking a couple drags off of it. But basically, you just want to toast that tip until it's nice and evenly lit around there, and then you sit back and you enjoy your cigar. Now, one other thing that you do want to remember when you're smoking a cigar, cigars are not meant to be smoked fast. They're nice. They're meant to be smoked slowly and evenly, and that's what ends up happening is if you start to smoke a cigar too fast, it will burn unevenly, and then you can hold it up like this, and then you'll see it's jagged and stuff on there. So don't go ahead and try to inhale a cigar. If you have to smoke something quickly, they do make cigarros. Sometimes they like, the best way I can describe someone's like what a cigarro is. If you ever seen a Clint Eastwood movie when he was a cowboy, he always had the little cigarro hanging out of his mouth there. That's kind of what a cigarro is. It's basically a cigar wrap, leaves and tobacco and everything like that, but it's in the small size of a cigarette. So that's kind of your cigar portion of communications and cigars. Let's talk now about the communications, the big head off that we have. But you know what? I see a lot of people in the chat. I want to acknowledge everybody first on there. I always appreciate everybody checking in on there, and that's no different than any other. So first we have the Smoking Ape. Good evening. We have Chuck, KK6USY. Ben Manley. Good evening. Scout75. Lon, how you doing there? Liberty Cave. Thank you. Phil, thanks for checking in tonight. Glad you were able to come on over from Nuggets. And I do think T.O.'s show is on there. Temporary offline. His show, Ham Nuggets, is on before my show. So if you're ever bored on a Monday night, hit on his show first and then come on over to mine here. TC Fritz, thank you for hopping in there. Also to K0MRD Radio Prepper, good evening. Thanks for checking in. This might actually be something that maybe sometime we'll have to collaborate on or something like that about using some of these different types of communications and prepping and everything. Let's see who else is. I got the chat just filling up. Even he. Andolph, good evening. Rain in Southern California. Well, I will tell you this. I don't know if I have the picture, can easily bring up the picture, but we actually had golf ball and baseball size hail here today. And a lot of cars got damaged. A lot of cars got dented. Thank God, nothing by me. There have been some tornadoes that were around us on there. Everybody's safe. I'm not hearing any reports of any damage or anybody that's there, but there were tornado warnings. Sounds like maybe there were some funnel clouds, but of course, it's always hard to go ahead and fully estimate that until people can go ahead and get in there. Let's see what else is on there. K2EXE, good evening. WY7, Papa Dave, thank you. Taz907, good evening. And Kevin W., thank you for joining us this evening. Hey, if you ever have any ideas about communications and cigars, you want to talk about a topic, hey, you want to come on and maybe be a guest, or we talk about a subject in particular, go ahead and hit me up for an email there. Email communications-cigars@jjkcom.com. Once again, communications-cigars@jjkcom.com. And the last minute check-in is Bravo Whiskey. Good evening for joining in this evening here. So what we're going to talk about, like I said, is what's going on right now. It's a unique time, I think, that a lot of people can agree on. And here's why. Because for the longest time, GMRS was in a class by itself. You have to do that. Now, let me give you a little backstory to me, okay? I was first exposed to GMRS soon after I got my amateur radio license. And GMRS at that time was a really, really popular and a really, really important thing living in Northwest Wisconsin. Here's the reason why. We had no cell phones. There were no such thing as cell phones. Even the big cell phones that people joke around looks like they were calling in an airstrike with, we didn't have those back then. We had no cell phones. You had radio. And you had two choices of radio. You had amateur radio. Well, let me back up. You had we'll call three main choices to be used legally. You had amateur radio, you had GMRS, or you rented time on a repeater somewhere, somehow. Time on the repeater was okay. It was difficult because there was a cost factor to it. Not a lot of people like the cost factor on there. So we got rid of that cost factor, $10, $15 a month per mobile, So got rid of that. Okay. So then you had GMRS and you had amateur. Well, that's fine and dandy. But amateur, you couldn't do business. But amateur repeaters were very plentiful. Alrighty. And this is a time where, man, it really got me interested about like repeaters and everything, because we were linking repeaters and we were connecting repeaters on the amateur side and everything like that. But you know what? If I wanted to talk business, if I wanted to talk something to dad saying, hey, can we have pizza tonight or something like that, or blah, 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 I couldn't do that on amateur because we weren't at that point yet. If you're in amateur radio long enough, you remember the whole debate. Can you order a pizza on the auto patch? I mean, that was the crises back then, okay? Not now. God, I wish we had the problems of, can I order a pizza on the auto patch? That would be so great because life would be a lot simpler. But it wasn't. But the thing was, is then you had GMRS that came along. And GMRS was that great thing. You bought the license, and there were more restrictions back then and all this kind of stuff. And this was, now, mind you folks, this was before FRS was even really a thing. You got to remember, FRS was born out of GMRS as a means to talk around and between each other, not using repeaters, or if you didn't have repeaters. Okay? So GMRS in that case was a really great thing to have. But what ended up happening was that not a lot of people were involved in GMRS. There just wasn't per se the numbers then as there are now. And the license fee was a little bit higher and everything. So as time has progressed, we know a couple things. We'll start out with GMRS. GMRS back then required a license, and for up to just very recently, April as a matter of fact, it was $70, and $70 covered you for 10 years. Okay, that's $7 a year. Okay, you know what? People, and I heard people, I'm going to say I heard people be and moan. I want to make it a kid show today. Be and moan about, oh my God, it's $70 for 10 years. Okay, guys, come on. $70 for 10 years. Okay, you know what? How about this? Once a year, don't go to the drive-thru at lunch. Just bring a lunch from home, okay? Or get a bag of carrots and some water from the Quick Trip. That's a reference. If anybody lives in the upper Midwest, they know what the Quick Trip is. But anyways, point of the matter was, is $7 a year. That wasn't a lot. Okay, fine. Boom. People complained, whatever. And GMRS then was kind of like, oh, well, some people didn't want to do it. Now, that's not everybody. A lot of people said, yeah, I'll do GMRS. That's not an issue. So GMRS was $70 for 10 years. Amateur, as we know, okay, is a test. You have to take a test. All right. And you take the test, you get your privileges, da-da-da-da-da. Okay. Most of the people in the chat, most of the people that are probably tuning into my show tonight here, or this replay whenever you're watching it on there, is you're going to go ahead and say, well, yeah, duh, that's what we have to do, right? But this is where we kind of had this big change in April. And I don't think a lot of people realized the significance of this change, okay? I kind of relate the change as, how can I say it? Daylight savings time. Okay. Go with me on this one, folks. Go with me, okay? I feel there's tension in the chat. Go with me on folks. Daylight saving times happened. When it happened, people were like, okay, fine. I get a little extra hour of sunlight during this time of the day, and I get a little extra eating. You know what I mean? But what happened is that it didn't seem like it was such an impact, but daylight savings time was a significant impact. Alrighty? Same thing, I think, what happened here with GMRS and amateur. For the longest time, I mean, most people paid, what, $15? Was that what your testing fee was? I think it was. Correct me if I'm wrong, or people got more. But it was $15. At least that's what my group charged. And that was the basic charging on there. So really, to get your amateur license, you paid $15. Okay, cool. Not a problem. Boom. Here's my $15 and life's good, right? Then all of a sudden what happened is that you got your license for 10 years, and you got your little reminder in the license and everything. And as long as you went along and renewed your license before the expiration, boom, you're good. You don't even have to take a retest. It's not even like a driver's license. You have to actually go get retested. Amateur radio, you didn't. What about GMRS? Well, GMRS was like, here, FCC, hey, it's 10 years. Here's my money. Let's go ahead and kind of do it again if you wanted to. Same thing, kind of like business licenses and all those kind of things like that, okay? That's what I'm getting at. But what I think happened in April had more of a significant impact than I think what people realized, because guess what we did? We went and kind of took a price point factor between the two radio services, and now we brought it back into this even keel. Because now the GMRS prices went down to $35 for 10 years. That's $3.50. You can't even get a Happy Meal for $3.50, okay? But looking at that, now we added $35 to the amateur radio process. Now, I'm not going to get into debating the fee thing for that. I know that really upsets a lot of people, and I understand it. Whatever. But the reason I wanted to do tonight's show is because it was weird. And what I've been looking at and I've been watching as going along is, are we having a shift in the type of communications that we're doing? Are we having this weird enigma take place in regards to the communications we're doing? And the reason I say that is because I will tell you what, I have here, or at average, I usually have 2 radios and a scanner going. Maybe 1 radio and a scanner, one of the radios on scanner there. And the reason being VHF, UHF, and then the scanner. Well, VHF, UHF, I usually have my amateur radio listening to there on the frequencies. But then what I did was I went along and I started listening more and more to the GMRS repeaters. What I started to find out is what people are complaining about that is not happening on the amateur repeaters is literally happening on the GMRS repeaters. Someone could correct me if I'm wrong, but Tuesday nights or Thursday nights, at least in the Midwest, they have a net on GMRS repeaters. And I said a net on GMRS repeaters. And GMRS repeaters, guess what? In this case, are linked. Yes, we're talking about linked GMRS repeaters. And guess what they're kind of linking with? Like an all-star version of it, okay? But what I started to notice was there's people checking into these repeaters. And they're like through the Midwest. And granted, there's multiple repeaters in there, but guess what? Their check-ins weren't single digits. They weren't the teens. They weren't the 20s. They're like the 30s. And there's some nights they were even getting 40s. And I'm like, holy crap, what is going on? Because I tune into my repeater, and I'll be honest with you, tuning into my repeater and listening to a scheduled net, is like, that was a good 5 minutes, if that. And probably half that 5 minutes was the 2 minute and 30-second preamble we need to have for the net. But then it was like, what? Like it just started to baffle me. So then I started to look at it and I'm like, okay, well, this is interesting because I'm a guy who likes data. I like statistics. The emergency management side of me, that's what it is. You know what I mean? But anyways, it really kind of was like, whoa, this is interesting. Now, when that was happening before the fee thing, I was like, what's going to be the next tipping point? And really, what is going to be that next tipping point? And I went along and I'm like, wonder what it could be. Well, then the FCC said, here, hold my beer and watch this. Boom. They changed the fees. And now we had a $70 fee go down to half the price. So 50% off for the rest of your life, which is $3.50 a year. But now what we did is then we made the fee on amateur. So now we're at $3.50 a year, whether you're GMRS or whether you're amateur. So what was that long road? The long road was to look at and start to say, what are the difference between these two? Let's start out with the pros, because pros are always good. We like pros. We like good news. We don't like bad news. As I was told once, the only change a person likes is from a vending machine. Alrighty? So let's talk about GMRS. Now, GMRS is, and this actually kind of relates back. If you look on my channel here, you'll see that I talked about which radio service is right for you. Okay, so in that, which radio service is right for you, we took a look at all these kind of things on there. So we kind of touched on it a little bit before. We're going to kind of look over here. So GMRS has assigned channelized frequencies. Now, that's like a redundancy. Right, it's assigned frequencies, but they're channelized in nature, meaning that they are, going through the GMRS frequencies. And I'm not going to go through all of them. You can look up online. If you cannot find, even ask Lexi, Alexa. I call her Lexi because of the way she wakes up all the time. But I could easily go, Alexa, can you tell me what GMRS frequencies are? Yes, GMRS. Oh, I'm sorry. Here's something I found on the web. Okay, but anyways, the point of the matter is that they're assigned, and usually they're referred to as GMRS. Like I've heard some people refer to them as GMRS 700, or some people it's like GMRS channel 7. Whatever the case may be, they are somewhat channelized on there. In addition to that, you have FRS frequencies. FRS frequencies are also channelized on there too. You have FRS 1 through 14. And those are those interstitial channels that kind of fit. If you notice, they're like 5625 and 66125 and I can't remember them all off the top of my head right now, but they're in between those repeater frequencies, okay? But then there's also GMRS channels that are the output of repeaters. So in case you're not by a repeater, okay, you could still use those repeater frequencies. And what you tend to notice is FRS frequencies are channels for FRS 1 through 14, and then 15 through 22 are usually the outputs of the repeater. And then when you're talking about GMRS, they usually refer to as GMRS, 1, 2, 3, 4, all those kind of things like that in there. But they're assigned frequencies, and the rules basically state, which is kind of interesting because it's kind of a unique concept. But basically, if you have a GMRS license, you can put a repeater up. Just don't cause any interference to anybody else that might be using that same GMRS frequency somewhere. Okay, that's pretty cool. Because if you look on GMRS, like mygmrs.com or some other sort of resource, or I think Repeater Book might be doing it now. Someone could correct me on there. But the interesting part about it, though, is that people are putting these repeaters up and they're not interfering with one another. and you get to choose whatever tone you want. You could use a DCS tone, or well, I'll use the PL tone or DPL tone, or you could have specially signaling in there. I know some people run Motorola MDC 1200. I have to say Motorola because they designed it, and don't want Mother M to come in and shut us down. But anyways, you could do MDC 1200 on it, and blah 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 blah, and all those other kind of things. I've heard people do 2-tone signaling, 5/6 tone signaling on there. It's great. It's amazing. But what's also interesting as a pro to GMRS is that you can have a closed repeater. That's right. You put up a repeater. You can say closed. You can't use it unless you get my permission. Other people put up repeaters and say, hey, have a happy, right? But that's kind of an interesting part. So the pro is that you have the frequencies. You know what you can do. Repeaters, 50 watts. Mobiles, 50 watts. Handhelds, 50, or excuse me, not 50 watts. Wow, that would burn you. But like 5 watts. It has all that kind of on there. Now, the best part about it is that if you take a look at the GMRS FCC Part 95, which I covered before, there's a saying in there, and it goes ahead and states that it's got to be a Part 95 radio or capable of being type accepted for usage of those frequencies, so like a Part 90 radio or whatever, and that's where like a lot of these any tones technically slip by. I know some people mod amateur radios. I don't recommend that because amateur radios just aren't durable sometimes as a business radio or a public safety type radios. But off that. But the nice thing about it is that's how it is. You have your channel sets on there. You don't have to figure out what someone else is on there. You could just say, hey, let's go to FRS 5 or let's go to GMRS repeater 4, whatever the case you have, whatever you might be. Another big, I think, selling point to the GMRS is that your license basically covers your family. Okay, you buy the license. It's not like me for amateur radio. I'm my own license. I had to take my own test. My daughters want to do it. My wife wants to do it. My dad wants it. Whoever. Everybody has to have their own individual amateur radio license. Not with GMRS. I just pay I paid the $70 back then because when I got my license again. But now you pay the $35, and guess what? Little Billy, little Susie, and John Smith and Jane Smith, guess what? You all can go talking out on a GMRS repeater. And that kind of even extends out to the family too. So like you're traveling somewhere, guess what? Your family and you, family's in one car, you're in another car, like your dad, your mom, or extended family. You guys want to talk? Guess what? You can get some GMRS, like you have a GMRS license, fine. Get them GMRS radios and voila, you're good to go. Okay. That's the pros of GMRS, really, if you think about it. Now, what's the drawbacks? What's the negatives of GMRS? Well, be honest with you, the FCC was kind of a dick, and I'll say that. I'll probably get, and if I'm not on next week, that's because the FCC shut me down. But they went along, and FRS was not meant for business, but so many people were using for business. They upped the wattage to 2 watts, and now you can be used for business. Well, okay, that's a little problematic in those regards because that's the drawback. If I'm scanning and I'm listening like FRS channels or having to scan, especially go to Mall of America, oy vey. Okay, God, that's a nightmare trying to listen to FRS frequencies at Mall of America because guess what? Most of them are business. Some businesses go the extra mile and actually get the UHF 2-watt business channels, but you hear a lot of FRS frequencies being used for business, which it's legal now. So that's a drawback. Same thing with the repeaters. You get into an area that's too crowded or heavily saturated with repeaters, you may not be able to put up a repeater. You may not be able to use a repeater that's locally on there. That's kind of a drawback. The other thing too is somewhat when we were talking about closed repeaters, cool concept, sucky concept in regards to it though, because if you're going on a trip, like I think some of us here might be going to a little event in about a week and change in somewhat the middle of Ohio. Okay. But if I want to go along the way and I want to use GMRS repeaters, I really kind of got to look and like, okay, here's a GMRS repeater. Here's here. Now I got to plan out those routes and find out if it's an open repeater or is it a closed repeater. If it's a closed repeater, can I get access? Some will even charge you money for access. I know a few by me that will charge you $50 a year to have access to 3 of the repeaters. Jeez, $50 a year now that's more than a license. I mean, that's up to you. That's you as an end user. But that's kind of somewhat of a little bit of a con or a negative to that. So, GMR side, kind of quickly on there. Let's talk about amateur radio. So, amateur radio, positive of amateur radio, I guess I would say, is that you obviously have more power, you have more frequencies, you're licensed for the band and not necessarily the frequency usage like it is with GMRS. But with amateur radio operator, you can go ahead and do that. You can run some pretty high power on there. You're only restricted to what the FCC says you can or can't do on that frequency. You can do digital modes on amateur radio, such as digital voice is what I'm referring to, where technically on GMRS you cannot be doing that. Okay. Then let's see what else. The positives about amateur radio. Nice part about it with amateur radio is you do have more options of radios that are out there. You do have some ability to tinker with the different radios out there. You can do different modes on amateur radio. So it's not just GMRS is basically, for the most part, voice. Most part, voice. I want to stress most part, because otherwise some people will have a fit. But with amateur, you can do digital data, which data is pretty much digital. You could do digital voice. You could do analog voice, beaconing, all those kind of things like that on amateur. And that's kind of a nice part on there. What's the drawback to amateur? I think the biggest drawback to amateur right now is that you have to take a test. And when you take that test, it's only good for me. Okay? I can't go along and just say, hey, you know what? I want to go ahead and we're going to go in a carload of people. My wife, my kids, we're in one car. My friend Dave's in the second car. And Dave, do you have an amateur radio license? No. Well, then we can't talk on amateur radio. Does anybody in your car have an amateur radio license? No. Well, then we can't use amateur radio. So that's where it kind of comes into. Those are the positives and the negatives. I'm going to be honest with you. My opinion is, and I really don't want to do the opinion until the bend my antenna. Let me back up on there. Let me do that, because during the main part of the show, I never like to give my opinion. I try not to give my opinion because I want you to do it. But as it sits right now, as we look at it as a whole, let's start out that way. Between amateur and GMRS, to be honest with you, there's not really a significant pull in one way or the other, because they both now cost the same. They're both $35 for 10 years. One requires you a test but gives you more privileges, where one doesn't require a test, but it gives you a standard set of privileges which can be shared with people. So what you're kind of doing is you're kind of trading off your flexibility and power options. You mean power out, like, you can't be running 100 watts of GMRS. But with amateur, you can do those things. So that's, I think, what kind of is the trade-off in the whole deal. Now, the interesting thing I see going on here, and when you see it on the replay, you'll see it on the replay too. Lots of people talking in the chat about GMRS FRS, as well as amateur radio operation. And I think the interesting part is I'm seeing a lot of comments on there that are like leaning towards GMRS, which is quite, like I said, quite interesting in and of itself. Now, the reason I say it's quite interesting, though, is because I think people on this channel here, you're pretty much going to come here for either a little talk about cigars or listen to communications. And most people that are involved in communications are usually involved in multi-communication. So they're involved in amateur and public safety, or public safety and GMRS, or blah, 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 or whatever the whole combinations are out there of people that do those kind of things. But what's interesting is that it's starting to become more and more of I think, like a second nature. I had a chance last weekend to go down to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and wear one of my other various hats that I usually do for jobs and stuff like that. I joke around, and I don't know if my wife is watching, but I usually go ahead and I say, my wife spends $1, I make a dime. That's why I always have 5 jobs at one time. Love you, honey. Anyways, I'll need to be selling off some radios soon, I think, on that one. But what I did is I had a chance to go down there, and I was at a ham fest, and then afterwards I got to stop in down at HRO Milwaukee. Great group of people down there. I love it. They always got it. It's the bigger of the HRO stores, hands down. And literally, it's sort of kind of in my backyard. If my backyard was 4 hours long for me to drive from one end to the other. But the point of the matter was, I went down there and I started to take a look around, and I started to see there's more GMRS radios that were there for sale, or people buying radios for GMRS, or people saying, hey, yeah, I use GMRS, or even some people stopped in and they went along and they had their amateur radios converted to talk on GMRS. And I'm just like, wow, that's kind of kind of interesting on how much this whole thing is picked up. And then the question then starts to go in your mind is like, is this because of the lower licensing, or is it because of something that has changed in how we think and deal with amateur radio? So that's what really kind of made me start to think. And on the way back, I mean, I had a chance to do that, had a chance to play with the scanner a little bit and listen to GMRS. And I hear people just using GMRS a lot. Now, also kind of a side note on there, GMRS, some of the GMRS frequencies were used as, or authorized to be used as, UHF business repeaters way back in the day. And if you were already on there as a business repeater, as long as you kept your license current and everything, you were grandfathered in. The minute the repeater went down, you could no longer use it for business purposes. So sometimes I'll drive by, especially like around the Minnesota Twin Cities area, I'll hear people talking business on there, and you'll be like, what is that going? And then if you know how to manipulate the FCC database and stuff like that, you can read it, and then you see the people there and saying, oh, okay, hey, yeah, that's actually a old business repeater that was on the GMRS frequencies before all that thing happened on there. So with that, one last thing I'm going to touch on is let's talk about GMRS radios versus amateur radios. Now, remember, on this channel, we're non-brand specific or anything like that on there, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you that I think a lot of people, and I even saw a few on here that have said, hey, if you're going to be looking and getting a GMRS radio, find one that is either type accepted or can handle GMRS frequencies. If you got to mod the radio to get the GMRS frequencies, odds are that modification it's probably going to be a pain in the butt, to be perfectly honest with you. And the reason it's probably going to be a pain in the butt is because it's not meant to do that. There are GMRS radios out there that are simply like, you buy them off the shelf. They're kind of sort of to a degree pre-programmed with the frequencies, and you could select PL tones or DPL tones or whatever the case may be. Or you can buy a radio that's Part 90 accepted, which will take it on there, and boom, you're good to go on there. Amateur radios, obviously there's amateur radio manufacturers that are out there. They make a wide variety of radios. And some of the, some people buy Part 90 radio to be used in the amateur band because they don't like amateur radios. Hey, to each their own on there. But really it's kind of what you see or what you like on there. Don't fall into the guise that all FRS and GMRS radios are alike. It's like an amateur radio. Not all of them are alike on there. And that's where a lot of people will run into issues because they say, hey, this is a FRS radio or has GMRS channels and stuff like that on there, and that will go ahead and do it. And one last thing about it is, be a realist, okay? You cannot go to Walmart and buy a bubble pack Midland FRS GMRS radio combo and talk 50,000 miles. I mean, it's just like ridiculous. They're like the FRS radios that were only half a watt back then. You could talk, 38 miles. And I'm like, and you're smoking crack. I mean, it's just mathematically, yes, anything on paper can mathematically happen. And yes, it works. But in the real life, you're an idiot. You're an idiot. But with that being said, that's kind of what the differences are at kind of that 10,000 foot view of GMRS versus FRS. Like I said, hated to make this episode kind of clickbait, but that's why I said GMRS versus amateur radio, things to consider. Wanted you to go ahead and think more of that consideration in regards to actually just saying, well, this is what it is because this is what I told. But with that, now brings us to that special part of the show. You know what really bends my antenna? You know what really bends my antenna? Is when we take a look at what's actually going on with GMRS and with the way we use our amateur radio bands. Guess what? We're going to be suffering the fate of the 220 megahertz on the amateur side once again. And then on the GMRS side, if we don't go ahead and work and think about what we're doing, we could come into some issues that the amateur radio community has faced. Let's start out with GMRS. Once again, we talked about GMRS frequencies are, guess what? Channelized in nature. You're assigned to those frequencies. And for the most part, everybody does go ahead and work with them. However, Concerning points have come up about, once again, FRS radios got allowed now to go up to 2 watts and can be used for businesses. So if I'm going ahead and in a metro area now where I'm usually in a rural or urban environment, I may be able to use FRS channel 3 without an issue. But guess what? Now when I get closer towards bigger areas, or maybe even to get more towards like a metropolitan area, I don't want to call it a metropolitan area, but just a larger area, you may go ahead and find that businesses are using them. I could sit on my porch usually from home on a beautiful night, and with just a basic standard antenna, hell, for that matter, get one of those little rubber duck antennas that's only about that long, and I could easily hear the 3 or 4 businesses of an industrial or manufacturing kind of level on there talking and using about it, using the radios. And I'm sure they think it's their own radios, and I'm sure they think their own thing like that on there. What's going to happen is we're going to be coming into a crowding situation. Now, does that say we need to regulate and we need to put things down and we need... No. Regulation is sometimes over-regulation, but no regulation is over-regulation in and of itself. I quote a very good man that I knew that once again told me to have no policy is to have a policy, but don't make a policy because you don't think you have one. And what I mean by that is that as long as we continue to work together in GMRS radios, or GMRS usage of our radios, we're going to be fine. I applaud the people that put up GMRS repeaters. I myself am looking at putting up a GMRS repeater. For those that don't know, that's a crap ton of money. Antennas, feed lines, tower space. They're not just going ahead and handing away tower space free, okay, folks? But then repeaters and duplexers and everything like that. And then the cost of the internet or whatever we need to do to be able to go ahead and connect those repeaters together. So I do applaud on there. But what I'm saying is what happened in the amateur world earlier at the beginning is kind of happening now. Remember, we used to use the 220 band, and we used to be on repeaters all the time. I remember many times, just even going back 10, maybe even 12 years ago, where I'd be driving home from work or something like that, and the repeater would just be constant, nonstop usage on, your commutes on the way to work and your commutes on the way home from work. And now the repeaters are starting to become quieter and quieter and quieter. But on an interesting note, the GMRS repeaters are starting to become busier and busier and busier. So what really bends my antenna is that are we setting ourselves up for failure once again? And if not, what is there to shift about? Now, shift and change are not bad. I want to stress that. Shift and change are not bad. It's good to have change. It's good to have shift. But maybe what we could do as amateur radio operators is we can go ahead and saying, hey, what are they doing in the GMRS world that's making it more interesting? Why are more people flocking and willing to get on a net once a week, connected, yes, through multiple repeaters, but going along and saying, hey, there's 30, there's 40 people checking into a net. But then, maybe do we need as GMRS radio operators to be able to stop and take a moment and saying, hey, is amateur radio a communication civilization lost? And we're the new civilization that was birthed out of it? No, GMRS has been around for a long time. But is the growth, is the pragmatic shift in GMRS from amateur radio happening? And if so, why is it happening? Now, this is what I'm going ahead and presenting as what really bends my antenna, because it's not so much as like what pisses me off, because that's sort of what bending my antenna is kind of about, but it's also kind of fun too. But it's going ahead and saying, are we going to repeat issues of the past, or will we be able to go ahead and forge into new territories? And that's what this week's kind of bend my antenna is all about. So I want to say thank you for everybody that tuned in to the show this evening. I try to make my shows, like I said, more so that people can think about it. And that's what I really kind of want people to do and think about it on there. Like I said, GMRS is fun, and GMRS is really great. And amateur radio has its fun too. I mean, I can't go ahead and talk around the world on GMRS. But on the flip side of the coin, I could talk to slightly more people on GMRS locally than I can amateur radio. One last point I forgot to say, there's even now groups that are actually actively trying to work with the NWS now to recognize GMRS operators as weather spotter trained people. You know, for the longest time, you know, if you were a weather spotter and wanted to report to the National Weather Service, usually it had to be FRS. But now a lot of people are saying, you know what? I don't want to get my amateur radio license. It doesn't do me no good. I don't want to sit and talk about the weather or whatever. I don't want to do that. But GMRS, I can help. I can be out there. So that is kind of what tonight's episode is about. I see a lot of great comments that were in the section here, and I really appreciate it. I'm going to be putting up a poll here real quick, and basically, it's going to ask here: would you like to see a podcast of the show? And I'm asking this out there because as part of the show, I always like to go and grow and everything on there. So go ahead and submit your answers here real quick. And basically what we're looking at here is on Communications Cigars is that, hey, would we like to see a simulcast where you go along and maybe if you can't watch the show, you can listen to the show, maybe even in real time? Or would you like to even see a podcast separate of the show? I know a lot of people do like podcasts. A lot of people do like to listen to things on there. So basically just kind of seeing what people's ideas or stuff that are out there. So feel free to go ahead and take a look at the poll there and see what's going on. And we'll see there. And right now it looks like we got a lot of them coming in there saying yes and stuff like that. And kind of, I guess, proceed from there. So thank you very much for everybody that tuned in tonight. We will be having next week's show. Next week's show is going to be kind of good and interesting. I think it's going to cover kind of getting back to that whole aspect of all radios with Hamvention right around the corner. And from what I've actually seen a lot of actually on eBay and message boards and everything like that, we're going to cover the topic of buyer beware when purchasing used radio. So that's going to be next week's topic on there. Tune in 8 p.m. Central Time in the U.S. here, and if you're outside the U.S. or something like that, I'm not sure what time zone you would be in or anything like that on there. So until then, thank you, everybody. 73s, stay safe, and if you got your good cigars, relax, sit back, and enjoy them.